Heading south on the M6 again. And I've just realised I haven't got my front tooth in. Oh well. I can't wear my denture and chew gum at the same time. So I occasionally take it out and put it down here and chew gum and then put it back. But I forgot before I made this film, so that's crap. And I'm not going to start again. Yeah, this is just hello, an introduction. I'm trying to theme these southbound drives, I think. Now, the first one or two I made were just kind of scattergun, whatever I thought about. But I think I'm going to try to use this 6-hour drive as an opportunity for sustained thought. You know what I mean? See if I can pick up on the phenomenology of the experience to line my thoughts up in a straight line, comparatively straight line, and send them speeding towards their final conclusion. So this time I'm going to be talking about death and pain, death and night and blood, and animals and humans, because those things have been featuring quite a bit in my thoughts and my consciousness and in the videos that I've been looking at recently. So that's the introduction. This is about, if you don't like talking about death, pain and animals, then go elsewhere. God, fuck off. God, fuck off right now, you. Actually, talking about death and pain and blood and animals. I've had a slightly longer weekend up north than I usually do. I came down here Friday morning, first thing. Came up, hang on, I'm losing my directions here. I've lost my equilibrium, my car keys and my pride. I came up north Friday morning, first thing, because my mum is ill again. She's been on death's door 4 times, I think, maybe 5 in the last 2 years. We've done this thing where, you know, where the whole family gathers around the bedside and she lies there like, I don't know, something out of a film, and says, oh, I've had a good life, goodbye everybody, you can have my pictures, you can have this bit of furniture, you know, she does all that sort of stuff, and then she forgets who you are, and then the doctor says, oh, she won't make it through the night, and then you know, she wakes up and it gets better, you know, she's like on the edge like this, on the edge of the cliff, leaning forward into the light, and oh no, I think I'll hang about for a bit longer. It's just managed to catch herself before she goes over. So it's been another one of those weekends, but she is stable, as you know, as stable as a 95-year-old can be. So that's all right. Of course, now I'm driving south, she'll probably peg out, won't she? You know what I mean? Never mind. She's all ready to. She's made her peace. You know, she's all ready to go. She says. She's got an envelope all prepared with co-op funeral services written on, ready for the man to come round and do whatever they do with her. So it's all this. It's fine. But it got me thinking actually, because as people know, some people know, one of my dogs died a couple of weeks ago. Guy, little fella, and I was talking to one of my friends at work, Simon. Hi Simon, if you ever watch this video. I was talking to Simon about Guy just a couple of days after he died actually, and I'd said that we were getting him cremated. I don't know why I said we were going to get him cremated. I mean, I don't know why I agreed to him being cremated, but I did, you know what I mean? I was caught up in the sentimentality at the moment. I said, yeah, let's have it cremated now, individually cremated, so you get to keep the ashes. So I did all that business. I kind of wish I hadn't now, because I've got a box down here with his ashes in. I have no idea what to do with them. But anyway, I was talking to Simon about this dilemma. What do you do with the ashes? And it was a very kind of serious conversation, I guess. And Simon had his serious face on, and I had my serious face on. And then, you know, you get one of those urges to just kind of break the frame and to say the thing that's inappropriate. I had one of those urges. So I just said, well, maybe I should get some of those trouser bags, like in The Great Escape, and scatter him that way. If you haven't seen the film The Great Escape, which is one of my favourite films, it's set in Stalag Luft 3, a prisoner of war camp during the Second World War, and a whole bunch of prisoners dig themselves out through a tunnel, but to get rid of the earth from the tunnel, they put them in these long bags that they hide inside their trouser legs. Hello, Phoebe. And then whilst they're out walking around the compound or tramping over the gardens and stuff, they release the earth in their trouser bags so it flows out over their shoes, so none of the guards can see that they're hiding all this dirt. So I said to Simon, maybe I should get some of those trouser bags like in The Great Escape and scatter Guy's ashes whilst I'm walking that way. It was a kind of off-colour joke, you know, graveyard humour joke. Anyway, now I'm thinking, of course, if poor old Elsie doesn't make it through this particular cliff edge encounter, I might have to get some really big trouser bags. Really big ones, because she's, you know, she's not as big as she was, but she's big, you know. And yeah, I don't think it'll come to that. Not this time. Because as I say, she is stable. Yes. Thinking about vegetarianism again. I made a video a couple of days ago about this TED Talks ads worth spreading thing. I won't bore you with the details, but I'll put the link in the description box. I've been watching a couple of other videos about it. I wish there was a different word for it, actually. I hate the word vegetarian. Vegetarian. I was making videos about a while back, around at Christmas time, about analogous relationships between vegetarianism and atheism. And I think there's something of that in this word vegetarian as well. You know what I mean? It's like Dawkins says about atheism. Atheist describes what's not, but you know, you don't say to people they're an atheist or an a-leprechaunist, you know what I mean? But we give this God this special privilege, this pass, and so we describe ourselves as not of the God, atheist, which is a bit weird, because there's not a lot of things that we describe ourselves with in the negative. But vegetarian's another, you know what I mean? Because vegetarians don't just eat vegetables, it's an inaccurate description. It really means I don't eat meat. That's what vegetarianism means. Nothing with a face, nothing that casts a shadow or whatever, nothing with a nervous system, nothing that feels pain in my case. So you're describing yourself in the negative again, you know, I don't know, it's weird. It would make more sense, and I know no one's going to buy this, it would make more sense for meat eaters to have a name. To say, oh, I'm a carnivore, or I'm an omnivore. Actually, even vegetarians are omnivores, because we eat a variety of different things too. Yeah. So yeah, it shouldn't be described in the negative, it doesn't make sense to me, I don't think. I know why it is, obviously, you know, for the same reason that atheist means something in certain places, it doesn't mean anything in others. Describing yourself as an atheist in the UK is kind of meaningless, really, outside of very specific contexts. It's not a very religious place, you know, you sound like you're being a bit silly, really, if you say you're an atheist most of the time in the UK. Because pretty much everybody acts like atheists. There's nothing to fight against, you know what I mean? There's no point of resistance by which you need to, so you don't need to declare your refusal to believe in this dominant thought, because it isn't a dominant thought. Whereas I know there are parts of the world in which it is a dominant thought. It makes perfect sense and good sense to declare yourself as an atheist. And I think the same is true for vegetarianism and so on. In fact, yeah, kind of have to declare yourself a vegetarian in most parts of the world, because most parts of the world contain lots of people who eat meat. It's a dominant thought. So it feels like you're stepping out of the condition of the normal to be a vegetarian. And it's always the condition that's outside of the normal which is named, isn't it? That's the marked state, as I think Peggy Feline calls it. You know, most of the things that are normal, things that are part of the hegemony, are unmarked. They're just part of the transparent fabric of day-to-day life, aren't they? Like being a man is supposed to be unmarked in this society, at least, and being white is unmarked. Whereas being female or being black or of some other ethnic origin is stands out, you know, so you would have to declare that. You know, there's pilots and then there's female pilots. There's footballers and then there's women footballers. And it's the same with diet, I think, in this case. There's people who eat food and then there's vegetarians. Still don't like it though. I mean, that's one of the things that would happen, I think, if one of the things that would change if the numbers of vegetarians increased. You know, people think that if vegetarians increased, there'd suddenly be like a whole new raft of legislation was in, as if vegetarians are all Nazis, and we'd all get like, I don't know, we'd all snatch your pork chops out of your hand, you know, or something. I don't know. It wouldn't work like that. You know, changes would take place the way they always take place in democracies. Slow and silently, you know, that line from that hymn, you know, it's a kind of creeping acceptance of new ideas. That's how these things work, isn't it? And one of those ways that it would work is through language. So people would stop saying they're vegetarians and start with, because everybody, the chances are most of the people you meet would be vegetarians, so you wouldn't bother naming them. You would name people who are different. I think that's happened with smokers, actually. Everybody I knew used to smoke, and so if you didn't smoke, you would declare yourself, no, I don't smoke, you say. But now it's the smokers who would declare themselves. Strange, that, isn't it? So yeah, better words for vegetarian. Do you think, I should ask a question, shouldn't I, at this point? Be more interactive in my relationship. Do you think there should be a different word for vegetarian? And if you can be one that's not insulting, that would be great. Or do you think it should be so accepted that it's a bit foolish to even mention it, like in parts of southern India, for example? You wouldn't call yourself a vegetarian because everybody's a bloody vegetarian. Or do you think there should be another name for meat eater other than meat eater, carnivore or murderer? Yeah. Okay, a little bit more about vegetarianism. I made this video the other day, as I say, in response to this TED Talk ads were spreading campaign, which featured this God-bothering farmer from Mississippi. It's quite interesting, but featured this farmer from Mississippi basically justifying what he was doing, it seemed to me, by saying it was all part of God's plan. I actually left a comment on the TED website, the page with had this thing on, and the people who'd made the advert responded to it in a way which I didn't think validated it in any way, but never mind. But yeah, the video I made in response to it, I don't think it was terribly clear, but I was trying to say that whilst in this particular example this farmer had kind of justified the cognitive dissonance that he clearly had, because he was saying, you can see the fear in the cow's eyes as he drives into market, but he does it anyway because it's God's plan. He'd justified the cognitive dissonance that he was feeling by, as I say, referring it to a deity, God's plan. But what I tried to say was that it's not just religious types who construct what I see as fairly elaborate rationalizations for their dietary. Well, all of us do, of course, but construct elaborate rationalizations for their dietary choices. What I was trying to say there, but I don't think it came across, was that atheists do it as well. In fact, atheists, I suspect, are a bit more strident about it. Sorry, I should move this camera a bit more strident about it than theists. I don't think I've ever seen a theist on YouTube, for example, saying the kinds of things this farmer had said. It might be the case, but I just haven't heard that. It's often, it seems to me, people from the atheist community in the broadest sense, making what they claim to be scientific, rational arguments in favour of eating meat. Now, whether they're right or not, well, actually I will go on to that, whether they're right or not is kind of academic. What I'm saying there is that whilst this farmer had used religious reasons, atheists also use reasons as well. So there's always a kind of reasoning. Several things flow from that, actually. Firstly, I think it's, I'm absolutely sure about this, so I'm not going to put any doubt in my voice even. I'm absolutely sure that the supposed rational arguments for the continuation of people eating meat are just not valid. The health ones have been completely refuted. The ones that make appeal to naturalism have been refuted because the naturalist fallacy has been refuted. So all this bullshit about, we have canine teeth, we evolved to eat meat, therefore we should keep doing it. That's the appeal to naturalism. That's been refuted soundly. What else? Yeah, there's usually some other arguments, isn't there? I can't think of any. No, those are good ones, that's for sure, Yeah, the health ones for sure, they don't make any sense anymore. Oh, there's a really interesting and slightly weird one, I always think, which is to say that, again, it's an appeal to naturalism, but it's one that many kind of atheists will make, which is to say that yeah, all animals do it, or at least all primates and mammals do it, they seem to. Therefore we should do it as well. You know, it's that kind of an argument. But it's flawed in so many ways that, you know, many animals eat shit. You know, flies eat shit. Many animals eat rotting carrion. A lot of animals eat all kinds of things that you wouldn't want to eat, you really wouldn't. So it doesn't make any sense, that, actually, at all. It really doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. And they think about this appeal that we're animals too, so we should do what animals do. I mean, that falls down again, I think, in a paradox of that. Because if you're an atheist, let's say, and you're trying to justify your meat eating by saying we are evolved animals just like these other animals, therefore we should do what comes natural and eat meat. If you're saying that out of one side of your mouth, then you also have to say we experience pain, we experience suffering, just like all these other animals experience pain and suffering, because we're just like them. You know what I mean? It seems like people tend to make one side of that argument without recognising that when you do half of it, you kind of have to do the whole thing. If you're saying you share a kinship with animals that makes you a carnivore, then you also have to share you share a kinship with animals in that they suffer alongside your suffering. You can't get out of that, really. I mean, that's one of the ways that actually the religious people, I hate to say this, religious people have got stronger arguments here from their perspective. Because if you're a religious person and you're justifying your meat eating by saying it's God's will, and the animals are put on the earth for us, we have dominion over them, just like this farmer was doing on this video. If you're saying that, then that makes a clear distinction between you and the animal kingdom. You know, a clear distinction. And that makes sense. If there is that kind of clear distinction, particularly one that's authorised by the guy upstairs, then of course it makes perfect sense to eat them. But, you know, we as supposed rational atheists can't take cover behind that distinction, because we know, or we should know, that that distinction is very, very arbitrary. And whilst there may well be, well, there are life forms out there which we have sufficient distance from to recognise that they do not suffer. We know that plants don't suffer. I don't know about insects and shellfish yet. Maybe, who knows? The jury's out on those things. But we do know that, you know. So we can draw rational lines in the sand. But most atheists don't. They decide not to do that. They just ignore that. You know what I mean? So the atheist argument is for not eating meat. It's the rational argument. I beg your pardon. The rational argument for eating meat, coming from atheists, in terms of its internal consistency, makes less sense than the religious arguments for eating meat. And probably conversely, actually, because there's many religions, the Jains I'm thinking of in India, who don't eat meat. Various Buddhist orders don't eat meat, do they? You know, and I'm sure there's others. And their reasons for that are not, as far as I'm aware, are not the rational reasons that an atheist might cite. You know, not to do with animal kinship, or to do with evolutionary origins, or to do with the experience of pain, or to do with common kind of brain architecture, any of those kind of things that we might, a rational atheist might cite. If you're not eating meat for religious reasons, or if you're just abstaining from a particular meat, like beef if you're a Hindu, or pork if you're Jewish, if you're just making those kind of abstentions, if you're just abstaining from those particular things, you're not doing it for rational reasons, you're doing it for religious reasons. And that's interesting too, isn't it? I think. In fact, I do wonder who is the most committed to their vegetarianism. A rational atheist like myself. I know I'm elevating myself wildly here, but you know, someone who's come to their vegetarianism, or at least stays in their vegetarianism. I think coming to something is different to staying in something. But somebody who stays in their vegetarianism because they're undertaking certain kind of rational processes which have led them to think this is a logical place to be. You know, whether they're more committed to it, or whether the religious folk are committed to it. You know, it's a bit like the argument that David Sloan Wilson makes, I think it's Darwin's Cathedral, where he talks about the gold army and the silver army. He just invites you to ask about to think about these two armies. The Gold Army is an army of God-botherers. They're all highly religiously motivated. You know, they fight because they think God is on their side and God is protecting them, and it's God's force that's coming through their arms and so on. Extremely religious crusaders. The Silver Army is an army of accountants and cost accountants. And the reason why they fight is because they've done the utilitarian calculations, and they know that this war is justified on for these reasons, and it's a completely logical war from the position of the Silver Army. And David Sloan Wilson just says, you know, which of these two armies would you rather have fighting for you? And most of us, I think, would probably go down on the side of the Gold Army, because the Gold Army are likely to be nutters. Let's put too fine a point on it. They're likely to be far more committed, for good or ill, to their cause, because it's authorised by the deity and all of the beliefs that goes with that, than the Silver Army, who are basically doing the bloodless accountancy thing to drive them forward. I think there's a parallel, sorry, it's a bit of a circuitous bit there. I think there's a parallel there to do with vegetarianism. I do kind of wonder, you know, if there was, you know, if we're stranded on some desert island, you know, there's a whole bunch of us rational atheist vegetarians, 20 of us on this desert island. And on the other side of this island were 20 religious vegetarians, members of a Jain community or members of a particular Buddhist sect that didn't eat meat. And there was nothing to eat on this island except one pig. There's just one pig on this island. There's the only potential food source. Who would crack first, do you think? The 20 rational vegetarians or the 20 religious Jains, let's say? I think it's no contest. I think we rational types, I think, would find rational reasons to not be vegetarian. Whereas that's not an escape that's available for religious believers, is it? I mean, they might find an escape, but it's not one that works in terms of their faith. Yeah. I was watching this documentary, a Horizon documentary last night on the iPlayer, and it was about something about the history of pain, I think it was called. I'll put a link to it because I know it bits of it on YouTube. But it started out with, it's really interesting, I fell asleep towards the end, but the bit I saw was fantastic. But it started out with this classic quotation. It was this woman, I think she was a neuroscientist, I can't remember now, and she said this classic line: pain doesn't exist. And then she said, out there in the world. Pain doesn't exist out there in the world. It only exists in the brain. Take away the brain, and you take away the pain. It's a fantastic line. It's so, I've heard it many times. Modern Mystic, you said this if you ever watched this video, and many other people have kind of said that. Usually, I don't want to get into the whole subjectivity thing, but and it's true. Of course, pain doesn't exist out there in the world. It only exists in brains. Now that would make a lot of sense if there was only one brain in the world. You know what I mean? If all of us had one brain, you know, and that all the pain was in that brain, and there's nothing else apart from that one brain. But there isn't. You know what I mean? I'm here, right? And occasionally I have pain in my brain, pain in the membrane. But does that mean there's no pain out there in the world? No, it doesn't. Because look, this guy up here in front of me who's driving this truck, he's got a brain as well. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if over there in the world, in that truck, in the brain of that driver of that truck, occasionally something like pain goes through it. And this guy here, in this driving this horrible coloured Daewoo, but I bet that person there has brain pain occasionally. You know what I mean? So it is out there in the world. Look, there it is. And these animals that are flying past, some of them at least, some of them are stupid, you know. Actually, it's not to do with stupidity. I don't want to get confused with intelligence. But many of these animals around in these undergrowths next to the motorway here have got brains and central nervous systems. And those brains and central nervous systems are out there in the world. Take away my brain, and those brains and central nervous systems out there will still be there, and they'll still be feeling the pain. So it's just crap, really. It's so like, I don't know if it's, is it Cartesian? Is it solipsistic? Is it Berkeleyan? I don't know. probably some philosopher I should point to here and talk about how we all have this tendency to talk about personal experience and then out there in the world, as if there was no other persons out there in the world having personal experience, no other subjects being subjective to their subjective experience, you know. Because there are lots of them. I doubt it's any other planets, but there's probably thousands on this planet, millions, billions, you know, if you include all sentient animals, all having these brain experiences. So pain is absolutely out there in the world. How can anybody say it's not? I mean, it's particularly odd, I think, coming from this neuroscience. I'm sure she's very well meaning, you know, it may have just been a slip of the tongue, but she works with people who are in pain every day, you know, and a lot of the you know, a lot of the program is dedicated to people who had suffered terrible chronic pain. Some of these people, or one or two cases, didn't suffer chronic pain, which is equally bad. You had no pain receptors, so terribly damaged bodies as a result. And but yeah, so this woman who's got this intimate knowledge of the pain of other people and how to alleviate it, seemed to be perfectly happy saying it doesn't exist out there in the world. It only exists in brains. Yeah. I'm trying to think of an analogy. It's like saying language doesn't exist out there in the world. It only exists in my brain. Language doesn't exist. It only exists in my brain. What else? Another analogy. I can't think of any others. I can think of another analogy. I think language is pretty good, actually, because language is interpersonal, isn't it? And it's collective. It's something that's evolved alongside the evolution of sentient creatures, humans. And I think pain has kind of done the same thing. It's evolved alongside creatures with central nervous systems. I mean, so just in the way that all humans share the capacity for language, all sentient creatures share the capacity for pain. So to say language doesn't exist or pain doesn't exist out there in the world, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. Nonsense. A little bit more on pain. So I started reading this book by this guy. I can't remember this guy's name actually, but it's a book called Painism. I think his name begins with an R, maybe 2 R's. Anyway, this book called Painism, and he's probably most famous, this guy, for coming up with the term speciesism. Speciesism, which means the discrimination, discrimination applied to on the grounds of species. But anyway, this book Painism is pretty good, really, from what I've got to it so far, because it's kind of the articulation of a set of moral principles based on pain as the key unit of currency, and how it would work to deal with that. And it's in a sense it's a kind of either development or a refutation of negative utilitarianism, and of utilitarianism more generally, I suppose, really. So he critiques classic utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill, I guess, on the grounds that it just doesn't add up. You know what I mean? If in classic utility, consequentialism, utilitarianism, you add up all the positives and add up all the negatives, kind of. And if the positives outweigh the negatives, then you're, quids in, or whatever. The problem with that is that when you actually run models through that, it produces nuts results. So the example that this guy gives, I still can't get his name, is something like a gang rape. 20 guys rape one poor woman. It may be the case that the pleasure these 20 guys gain exceeds the pain this one and suffering this one woman experiences. So in terms of kind of classic utilitarianism, that's a moral act. But I don't think any of us would feel comfortable about saying that. So it doesn't, for that reason, and because lots of other examples you can run through that, it doesn't make sense just to do the simple maths. And then I think he takes on, I'm not sure about this, I might be confusing it with somebody else, I think he takes on negative utility, which is where you ignore the positives and just do the Bentham thing, which is ways you act you know, can it suffer is the key question. Can it suffer? And an act is one act is more moral than another act if it causes less suffering. You know, you don't build any of the positives into that. And that takes you a bit further, but it still leads to, you know, you can run models through it which lead to problems. And the biggest problem, which is one that I think a guy called Smart came up with, which is something that, to be serious yourself, Karen, passed my way, is that that if you just take negative utility as the keystone of your moral arguments, then less suffering means more moral actions, then that leads to a kind of antinatalism or a desire for death, really, because you know the least amount of suffering you can get is no suffering at all, and the only entities that have no suffering are ones that are dead, really, or not there anymore. So it seems to kind of pave the way for antinatalism, or a necessary embrace of death as the only way of maximally reducing suffering, which might well be the case. But there's probably more interesting things you can do with negative utility than that, actually. Anyhow, to get back to this guy whose name begins with an R, who wrote Painism, he's kind of coming at it from that point of view, and just talking about pain, as I say, being the key moment of currency, and the moment of currency is from which other moral values unfold, really. Yeah, it takes too long to talk about it. One of the key things about this, and I think this is a really interesting point, which I'm still trying to work around, is that when you're talking about pain or suffering as I say, the unit of currency, you have to limit your reading of that, your measurement of that, to the individual. You know, you can't distribute pain. Pains don't add up in groups. You know what I mean? You can't say this group over here is experiencing this much pain, as opposed to this group over here who's experiencing this much pain. You can't compare it to groups, because only individuals can feel pain, so you can't apply it, as I say, to groups. And also, when you do try to apply it to groups, or you do try to do a kind of accountancy or just mathematical additions across groups, across individuals, then it leads to absurdities. So, for example, this isn't an example from the book, this is just one that I've made up. If you can imagine the worst possible pain, let's say something like childbirth, whilst being waterboarded, whilst having your toenails torn out, you know, that kind of a pain, the worst possible pain imaginable. You imagine that, and then you imagine the least pain imaginable, the least amount of discomfort imaginable. Not pleasure, but just the smallest amount of pain or discomfort, which for me is something like that little bit of discomfort you get when one of your shoelaces is fastened a little bit tighter than the other one. You know what I mean? It's not exactly, you might call it a pain, but you'd certainly call it an irritation or a discomfort, you know, or you just have this urge that you need to go down there and tighten your shoelaces and balance them up, you know? If that doesn't work for you, just imagine something else. The least possible amount of pain. So you've got two pains, one which is the worst, one which is the least. And let's say that having this, you know, giving birth to a child whilst on a waterboard table having your toenails torn out, let's say that's 1,000,000 times more painful than having one shoelace tied tighter than the other. 1,000,000 times more. And if you don't like that number, just increase the numbers so they work for you. Then if you do that, then you're faced with a potential moral position. It's obviously it's hypothetical, it just tests the maths. You're faced with a hypothetical moral position of, suppose you had 1,000,000 people, all with their shoelaces tied incorrectly, all with that slight imbalance, all feeling that slight twinge of discomfort. And then over here you had a woman who was about to give birth on the waterboarding table, and the guy standing with the pliers right next to her. And then someone else turns up, 1,000,001 people now have their shoelaces tied slightly unevenly. That last person has added themselves to this huge group of shoelaces sufferers, and so there's now 1,000,001. So just doing the maths, it would make sense now to waterboard this woman and fix these guys' shoelaces, yeah, rather than say, actually, you know, you guys, fuck you, put up with the shoelaces, we'll let the woman go, you know. it would lead to that, because that's what you get with cumulative maths, isn't it? You will reach a point somewhere where you would have to say, yeah, well, this woman's just going to be tortured. These guys don't get slightly irritated about the shoelaces. So anyway, yeah, the reason why I'm saying that is this guy who wrote Painism recognises that and says you can't apply it to groups. It doesn't work in that kind of way. You have to stay with the level of the individual. Individual pain is not pain isn't shareable amongst groups, and it's not divisible in that way, which I thought was really interesting. Not quite sure what to do with that knowledge now I've got it. I'll continue reading, and I'll give you an update at some point. My shoelaces are untied right now, actually. I'm just eating the cheese and onion pasty and a packet of chocolate eclairs, and I feel completely sick now. But I'm on the A30, I'm heading towards Truro, so I'm within about 40 minutes of getting to work. I'm still thinking a little bit about pain, and I'm specifically thinking about a phrase that you use, Gary, sometimes. I used to use, I haven't really said it for a while, which is the first ouch. The first ouch. It's a good phrase, that, actually. I may well nick that, but I'll seek permission first. But the first ouch, yeah. I mean, what I'm taking from that, it might not be what you're handing out, but this is what I'm taking, is that feelings came first, broadly speaking. In the evolution, the development of mammals like ourselves, before there was this thing we call thinking and consciousness, there was this thing called feeling and sentience. And I think that's bang on, really. I think there's a lot of evidence to support that. I mean, I think before there was feeling, there was probably movement. And here I'm thinking about Rodolfo Linas, who I guess is a neuroscientist or something like that, who writes about that. He calls it motricity. It says that at some point with simple animal life, or you wouldn't even call it animal life, simple organisms, excuse me, some of them gain the power of movement. I mean, you can see with some plants now, you know, sunflowers turn their heads towards the sun, that kind of thing. It's a very, very primordial form of movement. It doesn't require muscles or anything like that, it's just biochemical. And things like amoebas did do that with their pseudopodia, you know, they put in these like jelly-like fronds. Again, purely chemical. But some organisms that do that, it just changes the game once you've got motricity, because it means that you're not passive, and I don't know what the word is, yeah, you're not stuck to one spot, you're not passive, and it's not, the elements don't flow past you, your own actions. The language isn't right here, calling it your own actions, but the actions of the organism, the movements that the organism makes, affects whether it lives or dies, or whether it thrives or suffers in some way. It doesn't suffer, thrives or dies, let's say. And that changes the game completely, because once you've got the possibility of differential survival, differential reproductive ability based on the actions of an organism, then you can build all kinds of things on top of that. So the first thing you would build is a link between the ability to move and a sense of the environment. So I'm kind of imagining like let's say a tank of liquid that's got a gradient, a temperature gradient in it. So one end of it is really hot, the other end of it is really cold. You put some simple kind of organism in there that's got some kind of temperature sensor, like a thermostat, and something like a form of motion, like a flagellum. You link those two together, and what will happen is that the organism, at least in principle, has the potential to sense when it's getting to a too warm a place. And they wouldn't need to sense it in any kind of felt way. It could be, again, purely chemical, and propel itself away from that high temperature, and similarly with the low temperature, and find an optimal point for its own survival and reproductive success. So you get differential reproductive and success and survival based on the capacity to move and the capacity to sense being linked up, sensory motor cognition it's called. But once you've got that, if you build in positive and negative values into the organism, you know, a felt sense of whether something is likely to enhance your survival or not, then you've got pain and pleasure. That's all you would need. That would need to be happening quite early on. As soon as you've got the central nervous system and the capacity to organise movement according to the environment, then you would want to build pain and pleasure on the back of that straight away, because that would give it the. In fact, you would build pain first, because in survival terms, it's more important to stay away from dangers and toxins than it is to go to really nice places. You know what I mean? You don't have to go on holiday every year to have a good time, but you do have to not starve. Yeah, so those would be the first ouch organisms. And then once you've got the ouch going on, you can complexify the ouch. You know, build all kinds of armaments around it to improve its capacity to avoid the ouch. And before you know it, you've got, well, obviously it takes a little bit longer than that, but eventually you would have something like you know, a brain stem, and then the various bits that build onto that. And indeed sensors, you know, sensors, not just the sense of touch and you know, the immediate sense of being in a dangerous place, but also the ability to sense danger from a distance, you know, the ability to hear and see things, which, you know, is in effect a kind of early warning system for potential dangers, or indeed for potential opportunities. You know, it's your brain doing a kind of SWOT analysis of the environment, isn't it? The fact that you've got an eye that tells you whether there's a tiger in the woods, and an ear that tells you whether you're, you know, in the presence of some predator or whatever. So, you know, those other senses again build on the capacity for sensing for movement towards and away from danger, towards and away from those sources of pains and pleasures. So you get the movement, you get the ouch, you get the early warning system, and then you get the, well, once you putting all that lot together, you get the opportunity for the kind of arms race and that produces consciousness ultimately, I guess. Yeah, quite a thing, isn't it, that? I was reminded this recently with this book I've got from Antonio Damasio that I've mentioned a few times. I still haven't finished it. I keep going back to it and then getting distracted. But that's one of his theses in there. You know, you get the rudimentary systems first, and then those systems produce feeling, and then those feelings allow the evolution of complex cognition and thought and language. He says we tend to think of ourselves as thinking beings that feel, when actually we're feeling beings that think, he says. Feeling beings that think. And you have to be the feeling thing first, you know. That's what's kind of weird about artificial intelligence research and some experiments in contemporary computing.